Good afternoon and welcome back to the afternoon edition of the academic panels. This morning there were some wonderful presentations, a very eclectic mix, but really gelled together, and I hope you managed to attend this morning. If you're just tuning in this afternoon's academic panel is really dedicated to reading Joyce together, reading Joyce as a group. And so we have leaders of various Joycean reading groups who are going to tell us about their experiences. But before we do that, Craig Morris, who is a caricaturist, has displayed some of his wonderful artistry at Bloomsday. I think this is the third year. Is that right, Kevin? Yes. So I'll let someone make an announcement about how you can obtain a physical copy of these wonderful caricatures. Come on down.
Thank you.
This is Joanne. Yep.
Joanne,
go
Joanne
ahead.
Patry. Hi, thank you very much for listening to me. And that's it. I'm here to promote and to offer you this collection of 72 caricatures and accompanying blurbs on the life of Joyce, friends, enemies, and influences. And yeah, it's a great collection. Let me just open it up so he's got 72 characters. I always go to the non-caricatures for some reason. Here we go. Ernest Hemingway, for example. So you have all these really, really interesting caricatures and the little explanation. So much to see in every one. Each one is an artwork. So I hope if you'd like to get one of these books, they're $40, tax included. If just write to Bloomsday and they'll give you my, email, and I'll gladly put one aside for you. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Yeah, now I'm going to turn the microphone over to Geraldina Mendez again, who is going to introduce our first presenter of the afternoon. Geraldina.
Okay, welcome to the afternoon academic panel of Bloomsday 22. Our first panelist, well, now we're among friends, is Jamie Salomon, who is the leader of the Ulysses reading group of Bloomsday, Montreal. He's from Montreal, he works in accounting, and he started reading Joyce since high school, but then he says that he properly read it like 15 years ago. I don't know what that means. And he's gonna talk to us, I think, about how he fell down the Joycean rabbit hole.
Thank you, Geraldina. Hi, everybody. I am Jamie Salomon. I am currently leading the Ulysses reading group for Festival Bloomsday Montreal. As Geraldina mentioned, I have a caveat. I'm not an academic, and I've never formally studied literature, and I'm certainly not an expert on Ulysses. I'm going to try to describe how I went from what I think might be a normal, healthy curiosity about Ulysses, and I fell down into this rabbit hole that I now find myself. I was first exposed to Ulysses in high school. I had an excellent English teacher in grade 11 named Donna George. She exposed us to all of Joyce's major works. And the way she spoke about Ulysses made me very curious to read it. She made it sound like the end all be all, the greatest thing ever. But the way she described it, I would not have had any of the intellectual self-confidence in high school to try to read it. I finally did try to read it. About 20 years later, I was drawn to reading long novels with a reputation for being difficult. And indeed, Ulysses is difficult to read the beginning. I found that it didn't have any of the normal armature that you might find in prose fiction, describing where you are, who's there, what their stories are, the conversations. I was able to see that people were supposed to be speaking. Joyce would indicate lines of dialogue with dashes, but it didn't coalesce for me, like a back and forth between people. But I remained really curious what little I was able to glean, some of the things that cracked me up. And then I had read it a second time on my own. I was reading it with the benefit of an annotated edition that has footnotes at the end, and I would flip back to the end, and I felt like these were my training wheels in a way. I would never try to read it without having some kind of apparatus at the end to look up some of the allusions and references that Joyce seeded the novel with. And then I found out that the Festival Bloomsday Montreal was hosting a reading group, and I signed up for this. Now, coincidentally, when I joined, it was right after you-know-who was elected. And our first meeting was the day after he assumed the purple. It sort of became my personal resistance. Ulysses became my personal resistance to this era of ignorance and hatred of culture, as a way of like taking refuge from the daily parade of idiocy around us. Reading it in a reading group, coming in every couple of weeks with a friendly group of people to talk about what we had read and what we had got out of it, it really opened up Ulysses a lot for me. I didn't realize the public reputation of the book does not account for how funny and playful it really is. And then we did the reading group again the next year, and this continued. And we wrapped up in the middle, of the summer around Bloomsday in June. And I thought I was going to move on with my life. There's other things to think about or to turn my attention to, but I remained curious about Ulysses throughout the rest of the year. And then I'm not sure what it was that really triggered it, but around the end of that year, this was several years ago and into the beginning of next, I first stumbled into and then plunged headlong into the world of academic, professional Joycean criticism. I had read one of these books about Ulysses before I read it the first time, the famous one by Stuart Gilbert from 1930. But then I stumbled into this world. I'd found sort of a book about Ulysses. I think it was by Hugh Kenner, and I noticed in the bibliography at the end there was many other of these books. And for a few years, that was pretty much all I did. Is I learn how to find cheap used copies, order them, read more, and then every time I thought, oh, I can't get to the end of this, I've read a few of these, this is fine. But I couldn't stop. I was compelled to read books about Ulysses covering every possible aspects about it I never even realized. There's an entire branch, I read some of it about, they call genetic Joyce studies, examining the successive drafts as Joyce wrote it and rewrote it and revised it. And then even when it got to the printing stage, he was still revising it and trying to look up what he added in, what he took away. Sometimes these things are minor punctuation, but they will say change the meaning of a passage or sentence. Some of these things that I discovered were dealing with, some of the famous symbolists or the symbological ways of reading Ulysses. Some of them were examining the syntax of Ulysses. Some of them were trying to account for Joyce's idiosyncratic use of Homer in grafting it onto then modern day Dublin. There was one of them that I read where somebody tried to prove that these stories in Homer were actually historical, but they occurred in a region of the Mediterranean that he believed Joyce transposed onto a map of modern day Dublin and trace the itineraries of the people as they moved through the book. Most of these would have been academic readings that the author would have had a particular, to me it seemed like a shtick after a certain point after reading many of them. And then they would sort of, some of them would quote more directly from Ulysses, some of them seemed to be very general, and as a general reader, I couldn't tell if they were reaching or if they were really onto something. And then there were some that I came across would be more general guides. As I kept going, I realized that I had enough of these things that when they referred to each other, I could check what they were saying about each other, to see if they're accurately quoting their colleagues. Sometime around this, I also discovered that all these critics, these academics, contributed to to academic and literary journals, and I figured out how to access those online. It seemed like there was never any reason to bother with anything else ever again. It was like I was trapped in this ocean. It's not like getting into, Star Wars, where there's an end to it. this is 100 years of stuff that I'm not an academic. I don't have a framework for how to like go home at the end of the day and, you know, do something else. I realized that, and as I went through these, I wanted to look up when they're referring, you know, to Ulysses itself. It's a very dense text, and I'd be like, I don't remember that. And I realized that many of these, or all of them, after some point in the mid-'80s, they all referred to a particular edition. It's the one supposedly a corrected edition that came out in the 80s that was headed by a German team by a guy named Hans Walter Gabler. And the thing about when they refer to this particular edition, instead of saying this passage is on page 254 of the 15th line, the Gabler, they use it in a way that it's continuous line numbers. So if they're talking about Hades, they would say, oh, it's not page such and such, it's chapter 6, line 322. And I also wound up with a bunch of different editions of Ulysses. That some of these books I finally figured out what the difference between them was. And I realized I had a Penguin edition of this Gabler, and it didn't have line numbers. And obviously to count out hundreds, you know, it's not really feasible. Now, I didn't realize that you can buy copies that have the line numbers in them. I thought this was an academic edition that I guess, you know, libraries like McGill would buy, and like normal people can't get them. So coincidentally, around the time a romantic relationship fizzled out one weekend, I realized I had enough time to go through it. And I spent a whole weekend. I spent 20, 25 hours putting in line numbers in this copy. And I would take a pencil, it's not the one I brought today, and I would, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then, you know, 10, 20, 30. And then to make sure it was correct, I had one of these books, reference books. It's a well-known book edited by a guy named Gifford. That it's very detailed, and I'd look to make sure that I just, you know, I put my lines in the right places, and I frequently didn't. There was a lot of erasing and redoing over that weekend. By 11 o'clock or midnight on Sunday night, I had a fully functional copy. And then Monday, I go on Facebook in some group. I'm like, can you just buy these? And I'm like, oh, you know, you can buy them for normally the price of a used book. It's like, oh, well then. Now, you know, this is from the mid-'80s, and then for the up until that point, I noticed that most of this industry seemed to really get underway in the 60s, and they would refer to the Random House edition, which is by page and line number, but it's really annoying to count out line numbers, so I made these rulers with all 42 or 43 lines that I can put beside a page. Well, because otherwise it takes a long, you know, like if you're somewhere, it takes a long time to start counting out 21, 2, 3, 24, and then you get it, you're missing, oh, and like, so just to make it easier on myself. So, and then I got obsessed. Like I said, this is all I would do. I had one of these at my office, one of them at my partner's house, wherever I'd go. I ended up buying all these online and just spreading them out and you know, putting these. So, you know, wherever I'd go, I'd, you know, I'd keep it at my mom's house, you know, when it gets boring. So, you know, this is, you know, so this has been over the past few years. And then, you know, when Kevin had asked me, you know, would you like to lead the reading group? I was like, God, yes, I feel like an alcoholic who needs a meeting. You know, I read one of these books after another, and I you know, it's very lonely. I mean, it's a very well-known book. You know, a lot of people have heard of it, but I mean, I had nobody to talk to about it. You know, I mean, so I mean, it's completely consumed me. I mean, I have to remember when people ask me what's new, they don't mean what book of this I got in the mail last week that I'm reading or what passage I was puzzling over. I have to try to not annoy, you know, friends and family by quoting from Ulysses, like the people who knock on your door for, you know, trying to religious missionaries, you know, just sticking it, shoehorning it into any conversation, like, oh, that's like a Ulysses one, you know, Bloom. I read literally about 50 of these books. So I constantly, you know, each one, they either compliment, or what I noticed early on, it's fun reading these critics where they would trash the previous generation of critics. Gilbert from 1930 seems to be largely superseded, but you know, I'd read them and I think, oh, okay, it's interesting. I have an idea, you know, and then I get to the next one and they would revise it. I mean, my head is spinning. I sometimes don't know my parallax from my metempsychosis. I have a research station in my living room with many different copies of Ulysses, annotated, different annotated editions. I went and I realized que je parle français, j'habite à Montréal. So I went and bought the 2 French translations to check sometimes how those would be translated. I don't speak any other languages, so I had to stop with that. I got to the point when these books that I was reading, when they were more recent, I'd sometimes find mistakes that these guys made, and I'd look them up online because these are recent books, and a few times I've written to them with lists of mistakes to try to correct for their future editions. I hope that I'm not developing a reputation of a crank as that guy sitting in Montreal that's not a, you know, an amateur. But yeah, I did something. I don't know if we're able to show it. At a certain point, to try to help myself, I went onto Google Maps with a few of these books, and with Ulysses itself, it's the only you know, the addresses of all, you know, these bars that come up. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is one that I did for the first few chapters. So just as a way, I wanted to see, for example, the one we have clicked open here is the 5th chapter. Actually, is there a few of them? Is this mouse? Oh, I can't move it around. Okay, well, you can see on the side of the screen where I would have, are you able to click some of those boxes on the side? Sure. If you can zoom out, you'll just assume. So this would have been, say, the itinerary of the funeral cortege in the 6th chapter. And then by doing this, I don't know if you can see in the Lotus Eaters, to figure out how the characters, maybe if you zoom out a little bit, just to see, you know, where all the action would take place elsewhere in the city. And you're like, well, how does he get all the way out there to get to the big end of the funeral cortege? And then I you know, this sort of goes on and sort of went on and on. Why the guys who wrote this book didn't get a bunch of interns to do this, I don't know, but I haven't finished it. But it became useful because I, you know, like just to figure out, like, there's an aspect of Ulysses dealing with space and time, specifically the movement of people through space. You know, if you read it, you know what I'm talking about. So this, you know, sort of was a help to visualize. So I was doing this, and then finally we started doing our reading group last year in January of 2021. And it felt like I finally have company down in this rabbit hole. You know, there's people we can talk about this. And then, as you'll see, my colleague, you know, from New York, around the same time we started up, there was another reading group that Elizabeth Salerno of the New York Public Library will talk about. We joined their group and they joined ours. We had a membership exchange. So now we all meet several times a month. Elizabeth will talk. There's, you know, different approaches to doing this. They complement each other very well, and it's largely the same sort of group of people. And you know, this is great. This is finally, you know, I don't feel so alone anymore. I have people to talk to about it. And I'm kind of now seeing Ulysses. I remember after we did the reading groups in 2017 and 18, it seemed to be less like a book sitting on a table than this living, pulsating thing. I now kind of see it, it's more like a bouncy castle you can crawl into and roll around in and, you know, pick things up and look at them. And yeah, it really is enormously entertaining. And I found I have to credit it as participating in a group of people, reading it and coming in to regularly discuss it, has greatly appreciated, broadened and deepened my enjoyment and appreciation of this. And I think the other people in the group also find the same way. That's really all I have prepared. As a kind of a cautionary tale, I suppose. you know, where you can fall into this. I suppose there's worse things to be addicted to or to be obsessed with. But there you go. But thank you very much.
Oh, take some questions.
Oh yeah, if I can answer anything.
If you don't mind. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, anybody got a question for
Dave, please.
I
Dave Sherman, one of the founders of the festival.
And it's what I call a slightly more exhaustive in terms of going into the actual.
Exhaustive or energizing?
Now I'm going to be doing my third group in the fall at just really right here at MCLL on Ulysses. But you see, the problem with this here is that it's much more restricted. And you really sort of have to decide what you're going to do with exactly 10 weeks, 2 hours a week. So you see, that's basically 10 sessions of yours, and you're supposed to sort of look at the entire work. Well, as you can probably guess, knowing it, you just can't do that. It's impossible to do it. And the first time I did it in 2011, by the way, which in fact, the birth of Bloomsday itself came from that very group, where we had 15, 16 people in a classroom every week, 2 hours a week, and we went through the whole novel, and it was amazing when I think back how well it actually worked, considering they were mostly neophytes. Most of them had never even opened the book, and yet we got through the whole, not the whole thing. We ended up doing highlights. Well, that's precisely what I did another one about 4 or 5 years later, a little more exhaustive. I think Kevin was a part of that one. And then finally, in this fall, I'm calling it revisiting Joyce after 100 years. And I don't have any plan to try to do what you're more or less succeeding in doing. And that is to really get into each and every chapter. It's impossible. As you know, you're in Circe, I think, aren't you right now?
We're drowning in Circe. It's like a quicksand, glub, glub. This is where I'm at.
A 2-hour session.
Glub, glub.
It's just not possible. So I think what I'm going to do, and I'm planning, I haven't started really detailed planning, but the idea is to go through it in terms of what you just showed in the map. Actually, that's a great idea.
I'll send you links. Anybody can
the
use them.
idea of highlighting certain things about that book. I agree with your first talk about the detail, minutiae that this technical, not the technical, I should say, academic world goes into. And in some ways, I'm conflicted. At one point, I like some of that stuff, and then I'm saying, stop already. Let me just read this book. There's poetry in it. There's all kinds of stuff in it that you don't need to actually analyze word by word by word. And how do you do that? Well, I'm going to have to struggle with that thing. But 10 hours, 20 hours is not enough to really do the whole thing. But I'm going to try it one day.
There's different ways.
It might work.
I couldn't get enough. There was a third one I participated in last year. Couldn't get to do it every night if I could. So I have no life.
No, it's a great thing that you're doing.
There was a third one, and they went at an even faster pace. They were, I think, doing 4 chapters in an hour. You know, it was skipping off the top. You know, there's different ways. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
can show an outline, and then so well, we're 20 minutes on this one and 20. Then finally get to Bloom. Where's Bloom? Oh, he doesn't appear to look.
but there's different ways. You know,
Then what
you know, like the New York Public Library, they have a different approach that I find works complementary. We don't. I mean,
Yeah.
line by line is a bit extreme, but yeah, we try to go through it because, like, I realized the first 2 times I read Ulysses, I kind of pretended or I didn't know that it wasn't a normal book. You know, I'd read the first word on the page and read the next word and the next word and get to the bottom page and do that. And then, like, around after when we did the reading groups, when I participated, and this was when I was at Concordia in the Our Studies room, when I say it opened it up, it was like a flower kind of like displaying its treasures. And that's when I realized that, like, there's no like, how do you say, like, throwaway stuff, you know, like maybe the guy walked out of the room, people clap, thank you very much. But then it's not like that. There's every single thing is sort of placed there with detail. It's like being on the beach and you're like, wow, it's a beautiful view. And then each grain you can, like, you know, is a work of art itself.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I guess this is what I mean by this kind of, I don't know, rabbit hole that I find myself in, is the more you get into it, the more you find there is to get into.
Yeah. After so many
And I don't have any, like, overarching kind of a framework for this. Like I said, I can't go home at the end of the day. trapped.
The example is Proteus, which is usually where people just say, forget it, I'm not going to read any further. And yet, if you read further and you read, for instance, that little section, to me, there's that poetry deeply embedded in Joyce. The sound of the ocean, sound of the, and he actually uses the sound. Talking about music, well, he's got music right there in Proteus after you read him walking on the beach and all of that kind of stuff. You hear this music of the water. It's, to me, that's one of the great things about the work. It's not that you have to analyze it in great detail, but voila, you see a great poet and a great writer.
Jamie, is there something else that brings you back to Ulysses? Would you read other things now? Do you read anything else?
I don't have time. We're into the long. We're into these very long chapters. So I like I said, I didn't realize it's not a normal book. So it's not like, no, I don't have time. I don't want to sound pathetic. I'm so, but I honestly, I don't have time. I mean, what do? Watch some boring TV show? I mean, come on, you can read Ulysses. It's much more entertaining. It's funnier, So yeah, I mean, okay, I do follow the news. I'm not like, that bad, but yeah, I read the news. And, yeah, maybe, we'll see. Maybe next year I'll go back. But yes, thank you very much, everybody.
Anybody else?
Yes, the reading group element is, that's a really interesting phenomenon too, like bringing, kind of democratizes the book, because
Sure.
the kind of academic enshrinement of Joyce, and it has a history and a politics that's very closely associated with elements in American Academy in particular, because of course, for a long time, Irish scholars didn't look much at
I think most of these guys I was reading were
also
American.
in Ireland at the time, but for a number of reasons that are really ultimately independent of the novel or of Joyce's work more generally, certain kinds of habits of reading and reception became entrenched, and of course self-legitimized. So Ulysses is a dream for the ivory tower, because how are you going to read it without the new priest? Let's go back like what Peter was saying about the Jesuitical strain in Joyce. So you have all these priests, like academicians, who then are given this tremendous authority and say, oh, well, that line is actually in Latin, it's from that, oh my gosh, this guy knows so much, keep talking. I'll cut my check and pay for my tuition. And, there's an industry as you know the word you're using. I mean, I'm putting it much, in rather more mercenary terms than it's fair. But certainly Ulysses has played a very important role in justifying a certain kind of way of learning culture. And the reading groups, Bloomsday, and other events, they came from below. They came from the readership, and often a confused or a partial readership, but in fact with an investment that was, as you're describing so eloquently here, really, as a completely disinterested fascination with the work. You're not expecting to be paid for it, and you'll get. I got lunch today. But there are different ways you get paid for knowing something about something academic. But what you're describing is, the thing that really will guarantee Joyce's future, because academic strains change over time. And I can see them in my own institution. We have a Joyce course, and people in the department sometimes say at Concordia, well, why do we have a whole course on James Joyce? We don't have one on James Baldwin. I think, okay, what other James do we have to have? But there is an antagonism to Joyce as well there. But that popular demonic Joyce enthusiasm is rather close to Shakespeare. Surprisingly, Shakespeare's so immediately funny and dazzling, right? By the time you get to the third episode, oh, I don't know what I'm reading anymore. But what really has sustained them is not the university or the college or the scholar, but the fact that something in Joyce, of all people, of all books, has stimulated a tremendous, again, disinterested sense of satisfaction in reading it. Not just as, oh, I read it. That's nice to be able to say. But after you've read it once or twice, it's not a big boast anymore, right? No, it's a sense of commitment. And so I think that
It's like a bouncy castle. You
reading
crawl
group, the
around and
digital
bounce around.
resources.
That's what it's really like.
yeah, well, those digital resources that you would contribute to,
Well,
kind of outside the university, you know, when Nabokov taught Ulysses at Cornell in the late 40s, early 50s, while writing the Luther, you know, he would have to draw those maps. He said, listen, never mind the Homer, you need to look at the map of this. You need to know where these people are. Of course, Joyce, Nabokov was meanwhile charting a novel, which makes a very specific itinerary across the Western United States, right? It's a road novel. But Joyce is telling him, there's a whole other world of the book here. But now all those resources, you don't have to go to Cornell anymore for that. You know, we've got you, Jamie, you know.
Nabokov, yeah, very perceptive comments.
So, but that's very unusual.
Well,
And-
that's the thing, is it has this reputation as this an exclusive province of professional literary critics. You don't have to be an expert in any of this. You don't have to, you know, this is one of the things. I mean, most of these books that I'm talking about, these academics, they're different than I thought. They're most of them are quite readable. I mean, even if you're not in the field, some of them less so. But a lot of them, you know, they really, at least I guess they come with different approaches. You know, what I know about Homer is when you get these books, there'll be the paragraph, it'll be a paragraph or two describing the Homeric correspondences. I can say that there, as far as I know, beyond the ones I've read, I collect an Amazon wish list, or, you know, every time I find out about another one of these books, there's like a few hundred of them. There is no single book that is entirely devoted to laying out chapter by chapter the Homeric parallels. It is not, there is no single book about it. None of these guys that I've read even get into any of that. Most of these other things, like, you don't really have to have read everything Joyce read and put into it to get a tremendous amount. You know, like, its reputation as being, ooh, it's big and scary. It is hard to read, but not for those reasons. I mean, you know, kind of thing I mentioned, it's like, it's, you know, maybe these modernist literary techniques, but it's penetrable. I find Finnegan's Wake very difficult to read and less penetrable. But Ulysses, once it's like, I don't know, for myself, I don't know that you can drive a car or driving a roller coaster. Once you can hold on, you know, it's a blast. It's incredibly funny, entertaining, and profound, and broad, and it has great applications to modern life 100 years later. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't think people should not be afraid of it. You know, if you have, you know, some curiosity and patience, it reveals itself, and it's a blast. It really is. It's great.
Thank
You
you,
know?
Jamie. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you very much, everybody. Thank you all.
Very much.
Anyone have something that had been maybe phoned in?
Oh, yes, there was a comment from one of the online participants. It's Lynn. She says, I was also introduced to Joyce by the same English teacher, Donna George,
Yes,
my favorite English teacher of all time.
it was great.
We read a portrait, and she recommended Ulysses as a summer reading. Never underestimate the influence of a teacher.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna answer it with the word teacher, because we have wanna hear now our dear Kevin Wright, that is a retired teacher who leads the Finnegan's Wake group, which is called Brothers and Sisters of ALP. And he's gonna do a little introduction to the Finnegan's Wake, and to talk about how Joyce's techniques changed after finishing the Ulysses.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Geraldina mentioned, I call it the chief navigator on the waters of ALP, Anna Livia Plurabelle. And the reason why we are called the boaters and sifters of Alp is sort of a play on what Mr. Joyce might have done if he'd been around today. The boaters and sifters of Alp are like the brothers and sisters of Anna Livia Plurabelle. some of the people who are in our reading group are like the boaters. They skim across the surface of the wake. The sifters or the sisters are the ones who plunge deep into the waters. And so we have all kinds of readers, all kinds of people who participate, and both are welcome. Now, about 9 years ago, Bloomsday got an invitation from the Darling Foundry. They asked, is there anybody in Montreal who's interested in James Joyce, who knows anything about James Joyce? And the curator at the Darling Foundry, which is no longer a foundry, it's an art gallery, got in touch with, I'm sure probably, was it David or maybe Judith? And they said, if you come to the Darling Foundry, we will feed you and we will read a page from the wake. Now, Dora Garcia is an installation artist. She is Spanish and she has created several different works based on the works of Joyce. And when we showed up, she had created a film called The Joycean Society, which is an examination of how the group in Switzerland has been reading Joyce for 35 years. Fritz Sen is the leader of the group. They meet once a week. They read for 1 hour. It's almost like a religious experience. You hear the bells ringing, everyone sits down, they open their books, they discuss. You hear the bells of the church ringing, they close their books and they sit for 5 minutes in order to come back into the real world. So anyway, we attended, there were several of us who attended the reading at the Darling Foundry. When we started, we had no idea how far we would get. In the space of 90 minutes, we read 19 lines. There were 40 some people sitting around the table from the crème de la crème of Quebec Artistic Society. We had singers, we had dancers, we had people like us who were just ordinary Joes who happened to like reading Finnegan's Wake. And so what happened is at the end of the 90 minutes, she said, time's up. 90 minutes to read 19 lines. And in my presentation, you'll see why probably it took that long. One of the things about Mr. Joyce that you have to know, and it was brought up a little bit earlier in the day, he was a stickler for accuracy, an absolute stickler for accuracy. One of the things that he was shocked by is he saw the 4 Gospels side by side, and he was not able to understand. This is supposed to be the story, and they don't agree. There are things in some Gospels that don't agree with things in the other Gospels, and he had a sort of an awakening. He said, I'm going to write something, and it will be very accurate. That was Ulysses. And he went to the extent of even writing letters to his 80-year-old aunt to ask, is it possible to get from point A to point B in a certain number of minutes? Because he wanted to have it as accurate as possible to be able to put it into Ulysses. The other thing that came up this morning was the religion. Buck Mulligan says to Stephen Dedalus, you jejune Jesuit. You've got Jesuit in you, but it's injected backwards. Okay? He is thoroughly steeped in his religion. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is to talk a little bit about and show you a little bit about some of the other things that did influence Joyce. Could we have the first slide, please?
Yeah.
that's the first one, and I don't need the second one. Okay. Batista Vico is an Italian philosopher, and you can see he lived quite a long time before Joyce. He had this idea that time didn't run in a straight line, that it came in circles. And there are 4 cycles. The first one is called the Theocratic Cycle. And in the Theocratic Cycle, you'll see that these are some of the characteristics. It's a primitive society. The voice of God is thunderous. One of the things about Mr. Joyce is that he was afraid of 2 things. He was afraid of dogs and deathly afraid of thunder. He has spread throughout Ulysses, throughout Finnegan's Wake, 10 100-letter words. They're spaced out and they signify a change. All of those words mean thunder. What you've got on the screen in front of you is the very first thunder word that appears on the first page. I will attempt to read it. Ba 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 da la grug rak rak takam miminara ron con con bron con bron ton and ron ron ton fong frava varahunamra pra stan tu hu burden and thronk nook. Those are all real words, but they're words from different languages. And each of those words is thunder. There are 10 of them. I lie. There are 9 of them. The 10th one has 101 letters. So that what you end up with, if you count up all of the letters in the thunder words, you have 1,001, like the Arabian Nights. So it gives you an idea of what kind of mind this man had. Could we have the second, please? The second Baconian cycle is the aristocratic cycle. In this, you've got incessant conflict between the ruling patricians and their plebeian subjects. So there's war constantly between the upper class and the lower class. Can we have the next one, please? The third Baconian cycle is the democratic age. In the democratic age, rank and privilege have been eradicated by revolutions. It's a classless society. But what happens in a classless society often? Our next slide, please. Something called recurso. The democratic age collapses into chaos and things begin again, like Finnegan. Everyone on high will fall and the fallen will rise again. Much like O Fortuna, Velut Luna, the cycle starts all over again, but with slight variations. And so this is one of the influences on Joyce's writing. Could we have the next slide, please? In Finnegan's Wake, we can see the influence. Finnegan's Wake has 4 main divisions. The first 8 chapters are the Theocratic. The second one has 4 chapters. That's the Aristocratic Cycle. Next, third group has 4 chapters. That's the Democratic Cycle. And the last chapter has only 1. That's the Recurso, where it goes back to the beginning. If you've ever seen a physical copy of Finnegan's Wake, you'll notice that when you open the first page, what we call the first page is not really the first page. It starts with the word river run, which does not have a capital letter. What that sentence is the ending of the sentence which appears on the last page. It's a big circle going back around and around and around. And so when you end, you begin again, like Finnegan. Could we have the next, please? Another person who had an influence on Joyce's thinking was a man called Giordano Bruno. Now, he was an interesting person. He was a Dominican friar. He was a philosopher, mathematician, and an astrologer. His big idea was the coincidence of contraries, a theory of, or a philosophy of dualism. Every power in nature must evolve an opposite in order to realize itself. In other words, if you have something that's good, you must have something that's evil in order for the two to be in balance. It's almost like the yin-yang thing, where if one part of the circle is out of balance, everything is out of balance. In the wake, we end up with a lot of twos. We've got Shem and Sean, who are constantly fighting with each other because they're opposites. In the first chapter, we've got Wellington and we've got Napoleon. And you can go on and on and on and find these dualities, these things that are clashing with each other. But according to Bruno, they could not exist in this world unless they had a foil, unless they had an opposite. And so every power in nature must evolve an opposite in order to realize itself. For his efforts, Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake in the Campo di Fiori. There's a statue of him there today, so he sort of has a little bit of revenge. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay, this next section sort of deals a little bit with the religious bit that was injected into Joyce, whether it was backwards or forwards, but I'll let you decide. The Book of Kells, it's a very ancient illuminated manuscript of the four Gospels. The decoration is so dense that the text is almost unreadable. If you've ever seen a page of it, it's covered in all of this decoration of gold and all kinds of colors. The text is hidden underneath it. It's so decorative. Joyce was inspired to write Finnegan's Wake because he wanted to imitate the Book of Kells. And in his Finnegan's Wake, the Tunk page is explicitly mentioned. The Tunk page is something that you'll see in a couple of seconds. Could we have the next slide, please? This, and there's a bigger version of it coming, so if you can't see it properly, you'll be able to see it. On the page itself is the text that says, Tunc cruciferaxent Christi cum eo duos latrones, which in English would be translated, then he was crucified between two thieves. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, these are a couple of things that you should know about the page, and we'll be able to talk about how they connect to Joyce in a few minutes. The XPI is an abbreviation for the word Christ in Greek. The border is a snake biting its tail, the Uruburu. It's an example or a depiction of self-renewal. If you look carefully, when you'll see the slide again, you'll see three groups of 5 men. That's 15 people. 15 stands for the 15th day of Nisan. That's part of the Jewish calendar. The 15th day of the lunar month, which is the full moon. Easter, the day of the resurrection, is the Sunday after the full moon of the spring equinox. The cross symbol is a mythological symbol of Earth, which stands untilted on its axis between the sun and the moon at the equinox. Most of the time, the Earth is tilted, but when it gets to a certain location, it stands straight up. That's the 15th of Nisan. That is Easter Sunday. Could we have the next slide, please? The serpent symbolizes the lunar mystery of time. It represents the Old Testament. You'll see that there's a lion in there. The lion symbolizes the solar power, the door to eternity, and the New Testament. The serpent has a lion's head, which means that the two are joined together. The old and the new are now one. Mr. Joyce puts this sentence in there. I've read your tunks this message. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, this is a bigger version of what you saw. You can see that there are the 5 men hiding in different parts. You've got the wall on the outside, which is sort of like the wall of the Garden of Eden. When you turn the page on its side, you've got the straight line up and down, which represents Christ. And you've got the 2 thieves on either side. You'll see also that the writing does not take up much of the space. Most of it is the decoration. Could we have the next slide, please? A little bit about shape shifting. In the wake, time and space are obliterated. It's a dream. As much as Ulysses was the book of the day, Finnegan's Wake is the book of the night. And if you know what dreams are like, nothing makes a lot of sense sometimes. Things keep shifting. In the wake, characters meld into each other. Time has no significance. You've got the Battle of Waterloo, and you've got Isis looking for Horus and Osiris, all on the same page, practically almost in the same sentence. So time has no real significance anymore, which makes it kind of difficult. It's almost as if you need a program to read this thing. But the idea of shape-shifting. 7 created things are represented in Celtic artwork. There's plants, insects, fish, reptiles, birds, mammals, and man. None of them are presented accurately. There's one page of the Book of Kells where you have the Virgin Mary sitting with Christ on her knees as a baby. She has 2 left feet and he has 2 right feet. And Joyce mentions that in the wake as well. Because it was not permitted to accurately portray anything which God had created. As a matter of fact, when the Book of Kells was created, and any other of the illuminated manuscripts, the monks always left certain things out, or left blanks, or made deliberate errors, because they were not allowed to make something that was an accurate depiction. The Druids practiced shape-shifting and were supposedly able to change their appearance. You've got Wellington changing appearance. You've got the Russian general who folds into him. You've got all of these characters joining into each other. In the Book of Kells, the evangelists have human and animal forms. John is always represented as the eagle, and the other evangelists have their animal forms. I think Luke is an ox, and a few the others have their own forms. In the wake, characters morph into different people and time shifts. When you're reading, you don't really know where you are, when you are. Time doesn't mean anything anymore. Can we have the next slide, please? We're still on the same page.
Next chapter.
Okay. The other shifts that happen, Anna Livia Plurabelle, otherwise known as ALP, is Earwicker's wife, and she's the River Liffey. The barman in Earwicker's tavern is sometimes a man, sometimes a flea. He hops. Issy is the daughter. Sometimes she's Isotte, sometimes she's Isis, the wife of Osiris. And one of the things that's sort of in common with Finnegan and Osiris is both of them were killed and both of them were resurrected. So we've got this begin again thing. Could we have the next slide, please? Language in the Tower of Babel. Joyce invents a language as he imagined it before the fall of the Tower of Babel. He uses words from more than 60 languages, which is why it's important when you're trying to read Finnegan's Wake. You have a lot of people sitting around the table who know a lot of different languages. When we were at the Darling Foundry, I think we had people who spoke Dutch, German, French, Irish, you name it, they were there. And when a word showed up, somebody sitting there knew what the word was, and we were able to figure it out. It reminds me a little bit of one of the language theorists that I had to study when I was learning to become an English teacher. Her name was Louise Rosenblatt. She said that what you need to do is you have to look at the text and put it together to make your own interpretation. So all of these people were giving us their ideas, but each individual person was creating his or her own story as we went along. Some words in Finnegan's Wake can signify up to 60 different things. I think it was David, you said that it's almost like reading the Quran. Each word can have tons and tons of different possibilities. There are puns and there are puzzling enigmas, there are portmanteau words. One of the things that I mentioned last night after the play was that Joyce was very interested in things that were modern. He was extremely interested in science. He was very interested in Albert Einstein. And one of the caricatures in your book on page 162 is Albert Einstein playing the fiddle. And if you look carefully, you can find Mr. Joyce's face somewhere in there. But the reason why he was so interested in Albert Einstein is because of this new science called quantum physics. And he said, well, if they can split the atom, I can split the atom. And what you see in Finnegan's Wake is all of these words that look like, what the heck is this? It's because he split one piece off of a word here, another piece off of a word there. He stuck them together to come up with a new word that carries his meaning. He said when he was starting to write this, English does not suffice any longer for what I have to say. I will write in the way that I have to, but don't worry, I'll give them back their language at the end. So you've got all of this stuff that looks like it's very, very weird. And that's why it's important to have people who know different languages, because you'll have a piece from German and a piece from Esperanto, or another one of those invented languages. I think one of them is Volapük. Well, we had somebody in our group who spoke Irish, and so every once in a while I turned to Gus and I said, okay, Gus, what does that mean? And he would tell us. Because despite the fact that people said that Joyce was not interested in Irish, it's not true. He was a learner, and he knew enough to be able to stick in words wherever he needed them. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? Interpretations. It's called Finnegan's Wake, and you'll notice that there's no apostrophe, which drives people crazy when they're typing it up because it always comes up as a mistake. But Finnegan's Wake could be interpreted as in the wake of Finnegan, if you're thinking of a boat, Finnegan's awake. Finn, again, is awake. Finnegan's wake. And then Finn, bang, the end. And then again, start over. Could we have the next slide, please? Our theme this year is ripples. And Mr. Joyce has had an effect down through the ages. This is a cartoon by Stephen Pastis, Pearls Before Swine. And the goat is talking to the rat. He says, "What are you doing, rat?" "I've become a pro wrestler. My persona is that of the writer James Joyce. I'll engage the crowd through my sheer number of rich literary allusions." And you notice the goat is staring at him. Admittedly, this may go over some people's heads. Could we have the next one, please? This is also another one from Stephen Pastis. That word that I read to you. Whoa, what is all that? Is your keyboard broken? That's a quote from the James Joyce classic, Finnegan's Wake. Oh, and the rat says, it's a fine line between classic literature and a broken keyboard. Could we have the next slide, please? This is the opening, or what we call the opening, of Finnegan's Wake. And you'll notice that the river run does not have any capital. In these two paragraphs, hidden in there, are the names of some of the members of Joyce's family. Can anybody spot at least one? I'll read it to you. River run past Even Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by commodious vicus of recirculation back to Hoth Castle and environs. Sir Tristram, the Oler de Mores, for over the short sea, at Pasancore re-arrived from North Armorica on this side of the scraggy isthmus of Europe Minor to Wilderfight his peninsulate war, nor had Topsawyer's rocks by the stream Oconee exaggerated themselves to Lawrence County's Gorgios.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
You got it. There's one.
And pasty, the first three words, past, even, Stephen.
River run past Stephen Adams. Stephen is his grandson.
Yes, past Stephen.
And some people ask, why did he write past Eve and Adams? Because when I first read this passage, I had no idea what it was. Had no idea. About 35 years ago, when we were on our honeymoon, we were walking through the streets of Dublin, walked past this little church called the Church of Adam and Eve. And then I said, oh, that's what he's talking about. Why does he have it run backwards? There's a couple of reasons. The first one is to get his grandson's name in there. Plus, the River Liffey is tidal. It goes out and it comes back in. Again, in and out. Nora's in there. You've got Giorgio. Lucia is supposed to be hiding in there somewhere. One time I did this presentation at Blue Met, and there was a little kid there who was probably 9 years old. And he said, you know, there's another name hiding in there. He's hiding in there. Past Even Adams. The third letter of Adams is D. The fourth letter is A. His Da is there. So you can see how things get a little bit complicated when you have to read this. In some ways, it's a little bit like when Peter was talking this morning about the Ignatian exercises, where you have to get into the text itself and become part of it. And that is usually what happens. We have a reading group that meets, now it's online because of COVID, but we meet normally on the third Wednesday of the month. And we spend about 90 minutes. We probably get through about 10 or 15 lines. It's almost like a meditation. And we probably will never get to the end of it. In Switzerland, it took them 11 years to get through the first reading of Finnegan's Wake, but they met every single week. We meet once a month. So I don't think that there's anything else.
Sorry, Elizabeth Salerno in New York online says, nor had.
Uh-huh. So Nora's in there too. So the whole family's there.
That's great.
Okay, anyway, thank you very much for your indulgence.
Elizabeth had a question.
Yes, she did.
And there's a question from
Okay.
Elizabeth
Yeah,
as
like a
well.
question.
She said, do you feel that having read Ulysses prepared you in any way for your understanding of Finnegan's Wake?
Well, one of the things about Joyce is he cannibalizes himself. There are things in Portrait of the Artist, which were already in Dubliners. There are things in Ulysses that show up in disguise in Finnegan's Wake. So sometimes when we're reading it, I say, oh, yes, I remember that from way back when I was reading the other sections, the other selections too. Okay, is there anything else? Yes, sir.
Sure. Whereabouts are you in the reading group in your journey, and how long has it taken you to get there?
We started 7 years ago on March 18th. And the last time that we met, we got to page 72. Page 72 in 7 years.
Just one fast comment, because you mentioned Einstein and this caricature. That's why I was looking at it. It takes a while.
It's on page 162.
It's really interesting. It's very musical. Einstein's playing this tiny little violin. And who do you think the violin is? It's Jimmy.
It's his face.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the Finnegan's is like I'm obsessed with this book, and I have tried to read the Vico book, but it's so complicated. Like, do you think, did you read it? Do I have to read it, the Vico? I mean, it's impossible. It's like reading the Divine Comedy. It's
No,
so
I only
arid,
read.
like to read it. I tried. I read like a quarter.
No, I only read what is necessary, but
But-
all I read is necessary.
So, but
Do you want to repeat that, Kevin?
As Jamie was saying, the only things I get to read now are things that are related to Joyce.
yeah, but Vico is related to the
Yes,
Finnegan's
but
Wake,
I don't think I need to know more than those 4 cycles.
Yeah.
And that's enough. I don't want to go down further into that rabbit hole. Would be
Yeah,
too
I
much.
wonder, it's impossible. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I have to. I try to read it in Italian, in Spanish, in English. It's like, oh, what is this? Oh my goodness. I need a reading group only for reading the Vico.
I don't know if you noticed, but I think it's the second line by Commodius Vicus. That's a reference to Vico,
Yeah.
but it's also a reference to the Emperor Commodius, who oversaw the fall of Rome. And this book is about fall and rising again. So you've got all this stuff hiding in.
You have to read Vico as a kind of, if you think about the philosophy that you have to learn the stages of, it's exhausting and probably enervating, but when you read it as a kind of a Harry Potter book, like building a cosmos out of found materials, then in a way, as a literary text, Vico's is a wonderful book. It's very agreeable to the novelist and Joyce, because Vico is really at a time where the modern novel hasn't been invented yet. But he's going to create his own he's his own kind of Don Quixote, in a way, who imagines this fourfold cosmos, right? Vico's been refuted, but as literature, it's one of the great books of Italian literature. Like the way you're reading Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah,
Remember,
there
you
you
said
go.
you have to kind of drop the inhibition. You
It's
know?
just that I thought that it was like a philosophy book, so maybe I was like just framing like a genre,
Yeah.
and that's what blocking me.
Yeah, but it's more like Plato's Republic. You know, there are many great philosophical texts which are
Yeah, that's
really
fine.
literary.
Because I want to read it.
Yeah.
I want to have it like like the back of my mind.
Form a reading group.
I have it.
She's got hers.
I have it. We already read it.
She's gonna
For Vico, though.
Yeah, for Vico.
For Vico.
For Vico
Okay.
reading.
You for one. Now because of you, I
Okay,
have to
one
read
more
it
question,
again.
the final question, yes?
You give me a book to read. I'm gonna give you a book to read.
I'm not gonna get a word in
Astrid,
here, I can
Astrid, go
tell.
ahead.
Why?
Because of all of the puzzles and enigmas that make it so much fun.
It's like a
Love
book
of
that have all the
literature.
books. It's a book like.
Mhm.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here in person for our 11th anniversary of Start Over with Real People. Thank you. I'll take this back. Thank you.
There's another reason for Finnegan's Wake. Yeah, because it defies the intelligence almost completely, which was Wallace Stevens' definition of a poem, better than any other literary text I know, certainly in English. You do read, you discover a different faculty of apprehension reading the book. It's otherworldly in that way, the way it stimulates a different sense of how meaning operates in the world, and it gives you such a voluptuous sense of something that we take for granted. You know, when language is so instrumental, give me that. You know, this is a pencil. You know, it's just a tool most of the time. Like you read the way, and it's liberated from its instrumental everyday uses, and all the possible resources of the language are brought together to create a kind of cosmic language that, in a way, everyone could read. I think that's the Jesuitical strain too, that idea that there should be a universal text. Yeah.
And it has to be accurate.
No, thanks for
To be
that.
accurate, yes.
Remember, he
Carolina?
famously said,
I want to
can
be his
justify every
friend.
word in a way.
This guy is fun.
Yes, he said that.
Okay, now I'm gonna present Elizabeth Salerno. And I'm not gonna do what I've been doing all day, like paraphrasing in a comic way that I think is comic. Everybody's biography, because her bio is like, it's a chef-d'oeuvre. It's a jewel, so I'm gonna just read it because it's so perfect that I'm jealous. Elizabeth Salerno has been a librarian at the New York Public Library System for over 22 years. She enjoys learning about things she knows little about and doing things that she's not very good at. Her interests are many and are constant sources of distraction from one another. Elizabeth is owned by a small dog who has heard more about Ulysses than any dog needs to hear. You cannot do better than that.
Hello.
Can I talk to us about some reflections about the centenary and about her reading group in New York's public library?
Hello.
Hi, Elizabeth.
It's an honor to be included in this event today. As someone who still feels new to Joyce, I should turn this down. I'm sorry. I have an echo. All right, hi. I'm someone who's still new to Joyce and Ulysses, and I'd like to share a little bit about being a beginning reader of Ulysses and what has become clearly the best reading experience of my life, thanks to reading this book with a group. Ulysses poses a challenge for me personally because it makes cultural references outside my educational background. I appreciated this challenge because I felt like if the work appealed to me, it would spark my curiosity and inspire me to follow other intellectual pursuits that were new to me, which is exactly what happened. My own ignorance of allusions in Ulysses opens a sort of portal of discovery, and I'm always happy to explore the gaps in my education. But where to begin? What's better than a passion for one thing to lead to another? My interest in Ulysses and Joyce came about somewhat accidentally and originated with a conversation in a diner with my friend and colleague, Valerie Simopoulos. Neither of us had read Ulysses, and we decided to read it at the same time. At some point, the pandemic hit before we ever completed the novel, and it was then that the idea to turn this into a library program presented itself. Valerie and I wanted to create a discussion group to welcome all readers, especially beginning readers of Ulysses, who might not always feel comfortable discussing this work. We wanted to start the kind of group that we wished we had during our first read of Ulysses. We were fortunate enough to work for the New York Public Library, and the library allows our readers access to a wealth of supporting research materials. During the pandemic closing, we were able to access digital collections and electronic resources online through our website to support studies and indulge curiosity and inspire exploration. This was also a great opportunity for us to highlight that expansive part of the New York Public Library's collection and encourage potential members to apply for digital library cards while the library was still closed. There was a lot of independent research by participants of the discussion group, and they often share scholarly research that they find enlightening. So NYPL Online is one great way to access some of these works. The early pandemic brought with it online programming, and here we are today. We met through our program participants from several continents, and this broader net enriches the experience for anyone local to us who comes to the discussions. During the isolating time of lockdown, these types of online discussions were not only a way of continuing library services, but were a vital means of connecting people of similar interests. It was really exciting to be able to offer that kind of platform, a virtual community space that kept the library experience alive during closing. Ulysses was a perfect immersion while staying at home, and we as a group are still very committed to continuing this series until we finish the book together. We have connected with the leaders of Festival Bloomsday Montreal and the members of their reading groups, and it has been so wonderful. It's actually something good that came from the pandemic. Our group is inspiring for me as a librarian and also stimulating for me as a reader, as I'm both a host and a participant. Reading Ulysses this time with a group, I've learned so much more because of the added insights and questions raised by participants with different perspectives. I learned how people have different approaches to reading the book and how the life experiences of readers inform what they take away from Ulysses. Listening to others speak about the book really enhanced the reading experience for me. And when the group meets, sometimes our discussions are what make me love episodes I didn't feel that way about before. Sometimes I just share my struggles with certain passages. And I also want to know what everyone else finds difficult, as well as what resonates with people. And thankfully, the people in our group are more than willing to open up this way. People allow themselves to be vulnerable. They share not only what they know, but they ask questions about what they do not know. They debate and present opinions contrary to prevailing scholarship. And there's so much importance in that kind of honesty in the discussion that it's just beyond measure. Many of us enjoy the wealth of literary criticism and scholarly publications devoted to the study of Ulysses. But discussions and research are supplementary pursuits, and they complement one another, but are uniquely informative. A dynamic that allows for people to comfortably share their thoughts is invaluable, because everyone's contribution is significant, no matter how recently they met the book. A first-time reader is an essential part of a discussion group. New readers raise questions on topics that more seasoned ones might take for granted, have forgotten, or never thought about before. An individual doing research will only go where their own questions guide them. A group discussion offers exposure to ideas that a solo reader might never come across alone. There's no equivalent for that type of dynamic exchange. It cannot be replaced by any static resource. So we began our monthly discussion series in December 2020. And after our 18th discussion, we are about halfway through the book at the Circe episode. Participants prefer to take their time to get a deeper understanding of the novel. And now, almost a year and a half into our series, I see how these monthly discussions have been a passionate commitment by the group. The discussions are not led by us as hosts so much as they're a collaborative effort by this network of peers. The absolute passion and drive that some readers have to commit to reading this one book is astounding, and this is not anticipated by me, and it never ceases to amaze. Many of us began reading Ulysses knowing that we may not complete it. First-time readers go from being unfamiliar with the book to falling in love with it, and the commitment unfolds. It's just magical to experience and to behold. Reading Ulysses was, for me, a life-changing experience. It's changed the way I perceive Joyce's work and the way I experience literature itself. It's somewhat embarrassing to say, though, there were some major misconceptions I had surrounding the book as a solo reader. And some of these I have found are shared by others. First, I think I felt the world of Joyce and its readership would be a sort of insular boys' club, comparable to the scenario in the library portrayed in Scylla and Charybdis. Stephen Dedalus and company pontificating with unapologetic misogyny. Most likely, this is the very sort of exclusivity and vanity that Joyce would have mocked and did in his self-deprecating portrayal of Stephen. Fortunately, reality conflicted with my false expectations. Women are major players when it comes to Ulysses, even beginning with the novel's early history. Female scholars have produced an enormous wealth of influential contributions in the areas of literary criticism and analysis. The work of and presence of female Joyceans has been so astounding and belies the notion of male dominance in contemporary Joyce scholarship. Not to mention, on a personal note, the brilliant women readers that regularly participate in these discussion groups and continue to inspire and educate me. So what I perceived before I read Ulysses were perhaps unnecessary obstacles and some false impressions. Unfortunately, it's still the kind of world that does not allow for all voices to be heard equally. It's certainly not just women who may feel excluded. Ulysses at times has been heralded with some sense of academic gatekeeping. There seemed to me an air that before one even opened the cover, an elite education is required for an attempt at reading the book, as if there should be a proficiency exam for those who had the audacity to talk about it. However false my preconceived notions were, I still often hear similar sentiments echoed by people when I speak of Ulysses to those who have not read it. Valerie and I were hoping to dispel these types of discouraging presumptions for potential readers of Ulysses. We hope to do this by creating a discussion group that would be inviting to all, even those who had the most mild curiosity about the book. For some, our discussions might be their first encounter with the world of Ulysses. Some people might feel comfortable turning off their cameras and some just listen, and this is completely fine. Others participate by typing in the chat. Some may not have started reading the book yet, and sometimes this is the case with some people who join us regularly. The people I've encountered in these discussions are so warm about sharing their knowledge and their ideas, and they do so with such a lack of judgment. So the Joyce readership of my imagination greatly differed from what I encountered when I ventured to explore Joyce scholarship and have meaningful exchanges with other readers. Even contemporary professional scholars themselves do not present the novel as inaccessible. Instead, they open doors to welcome and encourage readers who are new to the book. It is my belief that Joyce would encourage the reader to question established hierarchies. It may be odd to say about a book so seemingly incomprehensible at first, but Ulysses is a down-to-earth book, best approached with a sense of humor. The enjoyment of Ulysses is the reward for not taking it too seriously. Those new readers who persevere realize that the novel teaches one how to read it. The very literary mechanics of the book enhance it upon subsequent reads. The retrospective arrangement that Joyce humorously alluded to in meta references throughout the novel in reality comes into play for the reader. And when experiencing the book in different ways during multiple readings, it leaves one with the impression that it's an organic and living document because it seems to change. It is as if the book reinvents itself upon subsequent readings, each new experience of the book born in a sort of literary metempsychosis. This could explain why readers are compelled to read the book repeatedly. And when veteran readers are encountered in discussion groups, they appear to be as excited as if they have made a brand new discovery, and this provides for vibrant exchanges amongst readers. Joyce's work was both visionary and timeless, and yet there's so much that can move a reader on a personal level. Ulysses shows Joyce's empathy towards some of the characters that seem like even the worst people in the book. Joyce recognized the plight of people, the forces that might bind and oppress them, and the things that they contend with that might drive them to behave in less than ideal ways. He describes some of the ways that a fettered existence could manifest itself in great unhappiness, and how destructive that could be to a population as a whole. It's amazing to listen to discussions with our participants who are geographically removed from Dublin and living 100 years later. Readers now are still quite moved by Ulysses and respond to the world Joyce described, not just in an intellectual way, but in a universally very real and deeply human one. Through Ulysses, Joyce also shows us an illustrated appreciation of the beauty in human existence, some of which probably goes unnoticed in daily life. The characters in Ulysses are timelessly relatable. The attention to the female characters Joyce wrote shows phenomenal empathy and was progressive for his time. Joyce drew attention to those misunderstood or less than embraced by the society that they are living in, something he most likely felt deeply on a personal level. He, for many reasons, was not comfortable in mainstream society and was an artist who felt he could not work and exist freely in his homeland. Joyce suffered a great physical pain and the challenges of vision loss, and he knew what it was like firsthand to exist in a world that does not allow everyone to move through it with the same ease. One of the phenomenons about Ulysses is that it makes you more curious than you were before you read it, which is a literary and artistic feat. Readers draw parallels to Homer's Odyssey and the heroic in the arts alluded to in the novel, but Ulysses is more about taking these lofty cultural and literary and artistic notions and bringing them into real life. Joyce breaks open the mythic and heroic themes, and he shows us how they play out in reality. He gives us everyday people like Bloom and Molly and elevates them to the level of those heroic characters from the Odyssey. Or maybe he just does the opposite. Maybe Joyce is saying, look, the average life isn't an imitation of these dramas, of these imaginary giants. They are in our imagination because this is what mundane life is like at its core. Reading Ulysses and later looking at other art in a new way is a gift that Joyce has given us, and he's done it with a sense of humor. You can just about never experience a novel, a film, or a piece of music the same way after you read this book. It doesn't just teach you how to read it. It teaches you how to read other books, but mostly you teach yourself. Ulysses teaches you to shut your eyes and see.
Can you hear us all right?
Yeah.
There was rapturous applause there.
Yeah. No, we can do it again.
I can hear.
So my question,
Go ahead.
oh, I can ask that. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about groups today. Everybody's talking about groups. It seems that nobody can sort of go sit in a corner and read Ulysses. It's almost like we have to depend on each other. It's actually very Pentecostal, isn't it, with Finnegan and everything? We need to depend on each other to get the true meaning of Ulysses. So I guess my question is, can you imagine yourself if you started with a reading group, right? Could you imagine, what would you think if you actually just sat in your room and read it for like, well, maybe, I don't know if this happened to you too, but how can you compare the two experiences of reading it in a group and someone who would just sit by themselves and read it, someone who had maybe just an average education?
Actually, that was my experience. I'm a librarian, but I have no English lit background. My background is in the visual arts. Anything I've read that is remotely, classic literature or anything is just I've done on my own. But I mean, that was in part the challenge for me. I can't speak for Valerie, but I think our conversation in the diner that I can't really recall was something along these lines where I said, we were talking about, I don't know how the book came up. And we just said, oh, did you read that? I haven't read it. And we just said, let's try it. This was shrouded in mystery. Neither one of us, I think both of us read Portrait of the Artist, which, as you know, is a completely different kind of book. And we thought it would be less intimidating if we read just on our own. We both read it separately, but kind of kept pace with each other to keep going. We talked a little about it, but we were kind of just in our lives, just reading a little here and there, and basically solo reading it. And before we got to the end, the pandemic started, and we were a little further along in discovering I guess some resources. I don't think, I think I had a book. I think there's no way I knew of all the resources that I know of now, because I learned a lot of it from these discussion groups. So I was very much in the dark with this book, but it's hard to recall my first experience with it. I think some chapters I tried to read cold. Some of them I would look up a lot of stuff, but I ended up, my pattern would be to read the chapter and just circle things I had to go back to that I was curious about, because there was just too much. There was too much I didn't understand. And I would just focus on certain things that I found the most interesting, and then I guess look them up on the internet or look them up in the 1 or 2 books I had. And it's really hard to remember, because it was overwhelming and a completely different experience. And now because I'm reading with this group, and I like to prepare myself, I sometimes read the chapters several times before we have a discussion about it. So even though this is just maybe my second time reading the book, every time we begin a chapter, I may have read it several times before that month, depending. And yeah, it depends. But I think a person with like, an average education, it just depends on what your curiosity level is. I think also putting too much pressure on yourself to know everything the first, that's in the book is kind of a difficult thing too. Then unless it's fun for you, and for me that stuff is fun, but sometimes just reading the book it just tells you, what it'll tell you what you need to know and what you want to look up and where you want to go with it, But I think, that's what our goal is, to invite people and to read the book and to not feel intimidated, to not feel that sense that I had, that I described, where you feel like you have to be some sort of elite, scholar to read Ulysses.
You must be doing it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, I don't think that's the point, So
Elizabeth, we have a question from somebody online. Edmund, would you like to read that?
Sure. So this is from Susan Gilmore, one of the online participants. She has a comment she says, your comment about valuing the first-time readers is excellent. Joyce wanted the ordinary person to see him or herself reflected in the book. What made you keep going? And the second part is, do you ever read the pages aloud to yourself?
Yes. I think the first time I was reading it, I did a lot of that when I came across Proteus. And I really didn't understand very much of Proteus at all. But what I did feel about that, and I didn't know anything about like RTE yet, well, unfortunately. Like, I wish I knew about that the first time I read the book, because that's fabulous reporting. But I did read it out loud, and the way that chapter sounds is beautiful. If you don't understand a word of it, it's still, I don't know. I just, it made me like the book. And I know people find that to be a chapter sometimes that turns them away from the book. But if you just sort of free yourself from feeling like you have to comprehend every sentence, it's much more enjoyable. I think. I don't, what was the other part of the question?
The other part is, why do you keep going? What keeps you motivated to continue reading the book?
Well, there's always a new discovery in this book, and because, like I said, I don't have the education that gives me the background for everything that Joyce alludes to. I think I know, I'm familiar with Shakespeare, stuff like that, but this book actually makes me curious about other stuff, and it's hard to really lose interest because because of that. I mean, there's just so much in there. It's like a gold mine of a discovery. And not only that, it's exciting to go to these discussions, and the more discussions I go to, the more curious I get about the book. It's really great, because like people do bring up stuff that I would never think of, some of these questions people have, or the points that people make, or it just wouldn't come from my mind. So that also kind of feeds my my attachment to this book. It's great. I'm gonna have to stop reading it and read other stuff. Like I would really love to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and Valerie and I are going to start a sort of social reading group on those things. That's a little bit more casual outside the library, maybe. But I would like to do that. I would like to read some more poetry. I mean, I did in college, but it's now hazy memory. Some of these Irish poets I would like to read, and there's just so much I feel like I would like to read outside this book, but it's definitely like a springboard for those things. And because I feel like I would love to fill in like all these areas that I just skipped over in school, but I'm not going to do, life is short, I'm not going to do that if I just don't have an interest. But this book does give me an interest in other things, It's
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Does anybody else have a question for Elizabeth before we move on to our final presentation? No, well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Our final presentation, we go back to Geraldina Mendez, who not only has an ear for Joyce, but also has a reading group, Hispanophone a reading group, which she'll tell us about, and her experiences with that group. We said this afternoon was about groups because it's just a different way of looking at this kind of reading. This morning we had individual presentations on a variety of topics, but I think on this 100th anniversary, it's really important to demonstrate that there are ways into this book and into Joyce for everyone. That it's not just for academics, that it's not just for literary nerds. There is room for everybody in this book. So I'll turn the microphone over to Geraldina, who will tell us about her group. Thanks, Geraldina.
So let me so cold. I'm here again. So I'm going to start by explaining, like, the main group, the reading group is on Twitter. And for that, I have to explain, like, the nature of social media. Like, social media, all social media is different. For example, the Instagram is for showing your body, for pictures, and Facebook is for showing, like, the pictures. But Twitter is perfect for a reading group, because on Twitter, well, I actually installed Twitter. This is a bit tragic, because in Venezuela, the press is oppressed, and you cannot read the news, you don't know what is going on. And the only way we had to communicate with each other was like people tweeted, like there is the police is killing people in my street, and that was the way that we communicated, because the government had sometimes they had to cut the internet on us, so we couldn't communicate to each other. So that's like the way that I entered Twitter, because it was like it was a survival thing. And then, you know, like on Twitter, there are like you can just you're reading a book and then you can just tweet a phrase and it's like welcome. It's welcome. It's like you share literature. You can write bad poems and everybody's gonna read them, and you're always gonna find somebody that likes them. But the reading group of Twitter is not my invention. What happened was that I wanted to play the Liszt Sonata after a reading of Dante. I tried to read the Divine Comedy alone, and it was like it was too far, because it's a classical, like it's like too many centuries ago, and I have a lack of references, so I couldn't read it like properly. I mean, when I say I couldn't read it, I could have read it, but if I read something and it doesn't like, I want to read this, then I don't read it. I don't force myself. And I was like, oh, this is boring. I'm not gonna read this. And then I saw that somebody was announcing that there's gonna be a reading group on Twitter. But how these reading groups, it doesn't work like the reading groups like that. You sit down or you connect or something. And on Twitter, there is something that is called a hashtag. You put a word after a hashtag that is this, how you say, the carré. Before a word, and then when something, everybody is tweeting, you tweet about something, you put a hashtag, for example, Trump or something, and then when you enter your Twitter, you have to configure it in the zone of the world that you are. You see things trending. Trending means there's a hashtag that many people are using, and it's going to be at the top of the list. So that's the way the group like reunites. It's not everybody, like it was like a Latin American and a Spanish group, and we don't have the same hours, the same, I don't know how to say that. Like when we're going to bed, then in Spain they're having breakfast. So the advantage of the hashtag is anybody that is on the group, you can just click on the hashtag and you can read whatever everybody wrote on the hashtag, the most recent comments. So, but that's it was the invention of a guy that is a specialist, is a scholar, an Argentinian scholar that is called Pablo Mauret, and he became really famous because of this, because it became viral. It means like he proposed to read the Divine Comedy, and the hashtag was Dante 2018. It happened in 2018. And the proposal was, okay, I'm going to start reading. He just said that I'm going to start reading the Divine Comedy, one chant, how do you say that? What chant per day, from the January 1st, 2018. And it was announced. I saw it pass on my timeline, and I was like, okay, this is my chance of reading this, because I read about the guy. The guy is a specialist on the matter. And maybe that's what I need. Sometimes when you join a group, you can join a group because you love the book and you see that there's people that have difficulty with it, like him, or you're like me, like in that case, I needed assistance for reading that book, or motivation, let's say. Especially when it's a book that is not written in your language. In this case, it was Italian. Even when everybody thinks that we can all understand each other, it's not like that. So that was everybody thinks that we understand each other, but this is like Italian language of, I don't know, 16th century. So it's not the same thing. So and it's a 20-minute read that I could do in the train. So I did it like every morning. And it was a success. And what happened after that is that was an explosion that it never stopped, because it's still going of little readings. I am going to propose. I proposed that there was an Odyssey reading, Homer Odyssey reading, and everybody started proposing things. And because I'm a fan of Tolstoy, And everybody knew that I speak in Russian. I was like, I proposed you to read like The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is my favorite Tolstoy book. So, and it's not like a big group. Some of my friends from the Dante group, they said, yeah, let's read it, because I speak Russian. So it was cool that they could like tell me, and in my book, it says this, or how is in the original, like my only like expertise was like, I could read the original. So then I launched my Tolstoy 2018, that was my first reading group, only with Ivan Ilyich. But then, I don't know, I had like the chance that I had people following me, and they were like, I will want to read more. So I was like, I knew that War and Peace was there, but I was like, I'm not gonna get in there. And War and Peace is there's gonna be like more 2 years reading. I was like, okay, I investigated what is like, because of the same period of Ivan Ilyich, that is my favorite book. Okay, Master and Man. Let's read Master and Man. Okay, we read Master and Man, and everybody was happy. And it's really easy because Tolstoy read in this fashion that the chapters are like the same length. It's really easy to read. And then after Master and Man, everybody finally they asked the question and they said, "Can we read War and Peace?" So I never read it. I didn't intend to read it, but then we did, and it works. And we were reading together like for 2 years. So we already were like a group of friends who I never met in person. I don't know them. I just know like we've been like reading together since 1918. On the other side, I wanted to read Ulysses because it's like, what is this book that everybody's talking about? I want to read it. What you don't understand is that you're very lucky because you speak English, and you're gonna read this book that is not on your language. Then you go to I had a boyfriend on Spain at the time, and I bought a book at what I thought that it was like the best translation, and I started reading, and it was unreadable. It was horrible. So I was like, okay, I cannot read this thing. Of course, I was conscious that maybe it's the translation, because I already saw when we had the reading group and the scholars were like conducting, like leading the group, they said it's very important to buy this specific, the thing about the translation, there was a big discussion about it. So I was educated that there's very generous guys on the net that told us which edition you have to buy, because not every edition is good. So I just tried like emulate that. And I was like, okay, let's see if I can read Tolstoy in Russian, maybe I can read Joyce in English. So I was so desperate because my translation was so horrible that I just thought myself, I'm gonna read this thing. And I could read it. And it was fun. I was like, this is nothing like I thought it's gonna be. This is not a horrible book. This is actually a fun book. And I read it twice alone, because I'm a lone wolf. I like to read alone. But because I already had those other groups and I had people following me, I was like, why don't I share this thing? Because nobody even like thought about, I didn't see any group of Joyce. I was looking for Spanish scholars to do it, but they are too old and they don't know how to use the internet. So I was like, would you like to read the Ulysses with me? And everybody was like, yeah, that's a book that I never read. I didn't want to read it, blah, 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 blah. And to find the translation, it was interesting because I read the original. So I could like read the translation and see if I'm not a specialist, but if the text doesn't reproduce the humor, like the tone of the book, then it's not for me, it's not a good translation. If you read it like when we had our celebration last Saturday, one of the women asked, what is the best translation? There's no best translation, like in Latin America, we speak Spanish in a way. In Spain, they speak another way. There are translations made by Argentinians that are like in an Argentinian way that is more Latin American, but then Spanish people hate them because they hate how we talk. And we hate how they talk. When they doubled the films, we hate how they doubled them. And our films are doubled in Mexico. That is more universal for Latin America. With the translation, it's exactly the same thing. For us, and in Latin America, those translations made by Argentinians are like, those are the ones who, because people in Spain, they are more more purists with the language. and they like Valverde translation and Garcia Tortosa translation that is well, I find it horrible, but it has something interesting because every translation has something interesting. For example, the Oxen of the Sun chapter that is supposed to be like a story of literature is written in different styles. Then how you translate that? But because he's a scholar, and that you can do only if you're a scholar, he did it like recurring like the history of Spanish literature. So he chose a style that was contemporary with the English style. So that chapter, when I do it, I use the Tortosa chapter. So the other challenge was the timeline, because like on Twitter, like when we're younger, and if somebody tells I tell people we're gonna read this for 7 years, they're gonna kill me. So it's like, and people get desperate because I'm not gonna ever finish this book, and that's why I like Nabokov said, like just go through the Finnegan's Wake with my eyes from beginning to end. I prefer to read several times, like for me quickly, than really slowly, and then I feel that I'm not gonna never end. And for people, they need, that's what I saw on social media, is that if you know that there are like, I don't know how many chapters of something, they know, 1 chapter per day, they can calculate. They know that there is an ending. In the Ulysses, you cannot say a chapter a day. You cannot say a chapter a week. You can calculate. So it was like the first timeline I made, it was like, okay, 5 pages a day. But then you have to calculate like the ratio size and difficulty, because you can read 5 pages a day of Telemachus, but you cannot read 5 pages a day of Proteus. So then when my first chronogram failed, because it didn't work, I put it like in 6 months to finish in Bloomsday. Then I did a second one, and I adjusted it with the hardest chapters, more time for the hardest chapters, but it was still too short of time. Everybody was like, I could read only half of it, but I want to read it, do it again, and they kept asking. So I restarted it in again, and then I did a 1 year chronogram. That's the timeline that worked. And like a month or more, at least 3 weeks for the harder chapters, and 1 week for Telemachus and Calypso and the things that you can read, like actually read. You know? And that reminds me of a math teacher that I had, that, well, I was like mediocre in mathematics. I thought that I was, still until I was studying chemistry, and there was some math teacher that was doing her doctorate, so she was doing an experiment. So she divided the class in 2. Some had like lessons normally, and the other half have like a book that you could follow, and you could like decide, like you could study the subject on your rhythm. And when I did it like that, I was a genius in mathematics. So the timing is important. There are no stupid people. There are nothing that you cannot learn. You just have to find your rhythm for reading, on your rhythm for learning things. And with reading is exactly the same. That's what I see in social media. There are people that is 1 year still like too short, but then they know that I'm gonna do it again the next year. Because for us like Spanish people, like starting New Year is always like magical. You have to start on January 1st. So they try again the next year. So they know that there is an ongoing cycle, commodious because of circulation, all the time of reading, and so they know that we're there. Okay, I'm gonna come up again in the 7th chapter. But then in 2020, I decided I read the Finnegan's Wake in 2019, and I was like, this is fun. I wanna share this with my friends. But then I was like, okay, but this is gonna be like in the Bible says that like a blind person takes another person to guide them, and they both like fall out of the cliff. So, and you know, like there are all kind of people, and I had to address to all kind of people that are very how you call that, snob. And it's like, who are you? Because my position is, I'm like you. I'm like you, I'm not better than you, and I read it. So if I could, I'm also stupid, so you can. So, and let's just share our ignorance. So let's not be afraid of reading this thing, and it works. But for some people it doesn't work, especially Argentinians. So yeah. So I was like, I need a vedette, because like the Odyssey reading and all the classical readings, they have this scholar, so they have a vedette. They had a vedette. So I needed one. That's why I found Marcelo Zavaloy, that is the only one that translated the Finnegan's Wake in its entirety to Spanish. And he was very approachable, but I found it because like, I'm kind of a hacker. If something is online, I'm gonna find it. I put in contact, and he was, well, you know him since last year. He's so nice, and he was, so when I did the Finnegan's Wake reading, it was a success because he was there. He was there, and then it was very interesting because it was like, you know, like this story about the elephant and the blind people. That's one of the person have like the leg, and the other touches it was exactly like that, because I'm a musician. I can recognize all the musical stuff, Wagner and everything. Then we had an engineer, and he could like find all the things that are related with the relativity theory or whatever, I don't know. There was another specialist, like Kevin said, instead of being in languages, is because there were people from different fields, and everybody was like, but I know these are rivers, or these are like a biologist. He could recognize, I don't know what, but I have Marcelo also. And next year, because this hashtag Joyce the year is not only Ulysses. In 2020 was Finnegan's Wake, and in 23 is going to be Finnegan's Wake again. They know. I already know. I already have another scholar, because for this I need a scholar. If not, they're gonna abandon me. I found another scholar that is his name is Juan Diaz Victoria, that he's doing like he's been translating it already for like 7-8 years. He published the first chapter with a lot of annotations, like and now he just published like 4 chapters that he has, because he wants to publish it for making money, to be able to keep translating it and to sharing. So I already contacted him. I have it in my group. And when we're gonna start with the Finnegan's Wake again in 2023, then I'm gonna have him, because it always helps. But if they don't do it by themselves, then somebody has to les harceler d'un façon ou d'une autre. So I think groups are like, I like reading alone. Sometimes I get tired because I have to take care of the group, and I like reading alone. I could just read. I understand it myself. Not understand it, but like I'm already committed to the book, and all the books that like Elizabeth said. For example, I want to read the Vico. I want to read all the books around the book. It's just I only read books that are around Joyce's books. But either somebody needs assistance, somebody needs company to read it. Either is like the fundament of social media, that you like something and you want to share it. There's a multi-billionary industry built on that you love something and you want to share it. So it's the joy of sharing something with somebody, and you learn yourself, and everybody's reading. Somebody, what is cool about the group that is not now they want to meet. I'm gonna try that also, but I find that it's better with the hashtag and the publications like in reading, because you can just go and read it, and you don't have to talk to people that you don't know. And you can go anywhere, and you can share links of everybody finds some strange link about the things, and how you do it in social media. It's just that now we're using it for that, but it's not only my group. Now they're reading Moby Dick. They have read Jose. Like they have read. I organized another group for Borges, because we kept reading in authors in other languages when we have Borges. So I organized like we read the Aleph, and in Spanish is the only Spanish author. There was a Don Quixote reading group. There are always groups going on, and we're all like, we follow each other. So you keep seeing Argentinians, AIDA groups. So it's like it's a movement that started. I'm just part of that movement. I'm just the Joycean part of the movement. So that's it. It's the joy of sharing, the joy, and sometimes you need like there's a lot of people I get this a lot, like, no, yeah, you're reading Joyce, that's horrible. I tried to read it and I couldn't. Have you read it in English? Which translation do you have? Do you know that there are many translations? Okay, if there's no humor in the translation, it's a bad translation. And maybe for you it's a bad joke, but it's a joke. And so if your translation doesn't show that, those are, because not everybody can, there are people that speak in English, but they cannot read in English. It's and the first group that I had, that was like the first year I made that mistake that I talk about the book, about the original, but I have to find like the translation that we're using, that is Marcelo's, because it's the one that has the humor and that is like nearest to the original that I find, and then find the page on the translation. And when I'm commenting something, I have to refer to the translation and not to the original, and translate all the Shakespeare stuff. I have to translate everything, because there are people that they don't speak any other language. So that's it.
How many translations of Ulysses are in Spanish?
Well, there's I never counted it. This Subirats, it was Argentinian, who was the first. Then Valverde.
When was it published, the first one?
I don't in the 70s, I think. Then there was Valverde, that's the one they read in Spain. There are two Spanish translations, that Valverde, and there is Garcia Tortosa, that's the one that I say that is like I cannot read it without the dictionary besides. It's like it tries to be too universal, and then it's like you have all the words, but you don't have the style. Then like it's most Argentinians like have done it, like Subirats, and then Marcelo, that has already 4 editions, and I think it's the edition, like it's the less professional, but it's like I compare it, so it's like what I consider the closest to the spirit, let's say. And there is another one that came out like 2 years ago when we started reading Costa Picasso, who is an English, like, I mean, he teaches English in Buenos Aires or something, but it was like the same problem with Garcia Tortosa. They have a lot of annotation and stuff, but when you read it, it's like, it's not the same book. The problem is to capture what is fun of the book, and not just the words, because if not, then what is this? What are you talking about? But Marcelo did that, and he keeps like getting better, because he knows that, you know, that Marcelo is like us, no? He's not a scholar. He was like an installator or something, and he did it because he was obsessed. And then he's been in contact with scholars, and they helping him like correct some mistakes and put some notes, but he never wants to have too many notes, because I agree with that. When I read, I don't use notes. I just read, and I leave my, like, if you know, like if I don't know all the literary stuff that is, I don't care. I'm not supposed to know it. I know I'm not an English teacher or whatever. So that's what I convince people. It's fun even if you don't know everything. You don't have to know everything.
Can you tell us about Marcelo's Vico drama?
Yeah, it's true. Like this year, there's another chance, because Marcelo is completely crazy and fun. So he decided, like he was talking about that in our Spanish Bloomsday celebration. They just got published. He got published Odiseo, which is the Greek name for Ulysses. Is another translation to Spanish, but without the letter A, which is as impossible in Spanish as to write without an A in French. And then I was asking, because he read from this new translation of his on our reading group. And I asked him, what is that? And why you do it? Why you do that? And he said that because I wanted to, and because somebody told me that it's not going to be possible.
French writers in the 60s, they're the ones who invented that.
Yeah, because he knows.
Yeah.
He knows he speaks French.
Yeah.
And I think that he got the idea from.
Yeah, right.
George Perec.
Oh, yeah.
Brilliant.
Oh, I was just gonna add, I don't know if I missed what you said, but I was gonna ask, is there a French Quebecois version? I think that would very well suit Joyce.
But the translation that I know that's an interesting question, because I think like what I saw, that's like what I find the Spanish translation problem is, if you want to be too universal, then you're nothing. You have no flavor. And this is a very local book. So I want to do like a Caribbean translation, because Caribbean people, we talk in a special way, we understand each other. And Argentinians, they talk in a way that is closer to us, but it's not ours, because so I think that if you translate it in a local way, it gains.
It's the comical thing about the small communities, right? Because people always make fun of us, right? Our French here and everything. It's comical.
But that's it.
Comical. We are a funny French. The way we are funny, everyone, and that's what I think Joyce.
Everybody is funny if you look close enough. Everybody is funny if, for example, I live in the Ukraine, and everybody has this idea of Russian people, of Ukrainian people to be like, when you know people, like when you know somebody really close, everybody has humor, and everybody is a person. Like everybody's nice if you know them, like the books, the close enough.
I remember the very first group I gave on Ulysses at McGill, 2011, it was a francophone lady who said, doesn't sound like this public talk. And it was at the end of, what is it, one, they're at the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
See, and they go to the pub.
Yeah.
And when she said, that's not the way a pub would sound en français here in Montreal. And so she did a little translation of it herself. It's so local. Some of that stuff, it gives you that local taste of that.
Yeah, we do
It
that.
doesn't necessarily give you that local taste of Montreal or Paris or Moscow.
But you need like the font that we have is different than the font that you have, because I just remember I had to open the Facebook group because there are a lot of people. Most of people have Facebook, so they forced me to open it. And then I just bring from Twitter the interesting things. But then in my Facebook group, I have a guy from Peru that is just a guy like he's not a scholar or something, and he's doing his translation in Spanish, like from Peru. So I think that's like the way that you can access this, like for people to feel like you like you feel when you read it, like when people, like English people of Irish accent or Irish people feel, because if you don't have this connection.
The way they say things in Peru is not necessarily the same thing that they say in Buenos Aires or somewhere else.
No, it's not. It's completely different. Like the Mexican Spanish is like the more like correct for us, because Spanish from Spain it sounds funny to us, and you don't. When they have like these tours for tourists, they have a group for us, because and if you join a group of Spanish, no, you're not gonna understand. This is not your group, because it's really like, it's shocking for us. It's like, it's funny. And in the Caribbean, we talk like the same way with the same accent, and we understand each other. Then when you go through the Andes, it changes, like Argentina, like to the Andes, to the south. In Mexico, they have like, it's Mexicans that double our films, because they are the one, they have a huge accent, but they are the ones that found like an equilibrium that everybody understands, but I don't know why no Mexican has translated it. It's always Argentinians.
To me, it's amazing that there are so many translations of this. I'm just thinking what Finnegan's Wake in Mandarin. I believe they actually finished a version of it.
I have a woman in my group that actually she wants to present a paper here. Maybe it's about Picasso and Joyce, and she's from Catalonia, so she speaks Catalan, and she's translating the Finnegan's Way to Catalan, and she wants to read Ulysses, and she wants to understand it. Like she's reading it in Spanish, and she was asking me about metempsychosis, how to translate that, and we were explaining to her what that means, metempsychosis, and we were doing it means nothing. It just sounds like a joke, like you say metempsychosis, and in Spanish it's like méteselo a Jose or something sexual that sounds similar, and has like a. We were explaining to her, you don't have to translate metempsychosis, you have to translate it like with something comical, sexual in Spanish.
Fantastic. Any other question? Is there a question online?
One last one, I guess, from Elizabeth Salerno, who's the early presenter. She asked, have you read Ulysses in Russian?
No, I already read War and Peace. But you know, like I started an Karenina reading group, and I didn't like Anna Karenina, so I didn't finish, and the group kept going without me. It had a life on its own. No, I read some. There are some guys that send me things, and I'm not interested because I can read it in the original. I just compare some key parts. Like I do it like for the group because I don't need it. But no, yeah, I know that I could read it, but I prefer Tolstoy.
Just one more technical question, because I don't really know much about using Twitter or Facebook. I'm still just reading the books, you know. But how on Twitter is it possible to read anything?
Yes.
What is actually on Twitter? So I go to the site. I'm reading Olivia Plurabel with Geraldina. Who wouldn't? Obviously, we're all going to go there.
Yeah.
But then what happens? Like, what does somebody write in this? What is it, 100 and several?
Yeah, but like you can publish it like I do. I write articles on each chapter. I publish it in my blog and I share the link. Or you can do now. We have this since last year. You have a thread. You said Olivia Plurabelle thread. You announce it and you put like the emoticon of thread, and then you just break the text in little chunks. And actually it's cool because people always read you, because maybe they don't read the whole thread, but they see passing some of the tweets, because the tweets have a limit.
Yeah.
But I don't know why people read you more when you divide the text that way, because people are like in social media, they don't read long text, they don't watch long videos, everything that has to be short.
Students.
Yeah, but then if it's like a thread, like you read the beginning and then you have to write it in a way that they engage and they go down, they scroll down.
Wow.
Or you just, what I do is I tweet like a catchy phrase of my blog, and I say, you want to read the whole thing, then click on the link. And you have to.
So like for Death of Ivan Ilyich, you don't put the whole, I mean, it's not it's a novella by Tolstoy, of course, but you don't put all that in the Twitter, right?
You know what I do? Like when I wanna show like a page, I read it on Kindle, I take a picture of the page, or for not writing, when we're discussing, we're gonna discuss like this part, then I take a picture and I share the picture, and they read it on the picture and they read what I wrote.
But then your commentary to assist the readers is within the 240 characters.
Like for example, I write like the thing on my blog, and then I just tweet some like interesting parts, and I invite them to read them there. I don't post. There are people that do that. They post the whole thing in the thread. But what I do is I post just like I announce it, and if you're interested, then you go, you click on the link and then you read it. But I don't know why that these people engage this way, because people go to Twitter like me to read the news. Like I don't like hearing the radio or watching TV. Everything, like I have to read everything. I don't like my ears are for music only. So
try newspapers. They're great.
Yeah, but I don't need it because I go to Twitter, I can read, I follow like I can read it and I can see like things happening and trending, and it's immediately, because sometimes for a newspaper, things happen and they are published the next day, but here it just happened and it's trending and what is going on, and then you see it immediately on Twitter. So, but Twitter is the perfect social media for literature, and it's working. This guy, like Pablo Mauret, he's been interviewed. He was invited to Dante's house, whatever, because he made literature trend on Twitter, and that's why I'm on Twitter. I just follow because like everybody says, Twitter is a jungle, but it depends who you. If you don't like somebody, block him. Or don't follow him. That's it. If you follow interesting people, I follow, for example, something that you don't know. Like I follow all the scholars, like Joycean scholars. So when there are the symposiums now, you can read, like, for example, Casey Lawrence. I found her because she's the one who tweets in Dublin. Yeah. She tweets live, like somebody's giving a conference. So she tweets like the main ideas, at the same time that it's happening. So you cannot be in the conference, but you can read what she's writing about the conference all the time. So with the James Joyce Symposium, you're reading everyone is like, scholars are on Twitter. Yeah.
So can we follow, if we follow you, can we follow all of your
yeah, if you follow me, you can see who I follow. I follow like all things Joyce, because like everybody keeps like demonizing the algorithm, but the algorithm helps me because the algorithm knows what I like, that I like Joyce. And the algorithm like made that I found about Nighttown on Twitter. My algorithm showed that to me on Instagram. So it keeps showing me who to follow, like English literature, modernist literature, Joyce, and I don't know what, like Finnegan's Wake, and I don't know why the algorithm keeps showing me because now they have this other thing on Twitter that they show you things that you might be interested in. And then for me, it's music and literature. So I like the algorithm do is.
So will you share your Twitter? For your how we reach your Twitter? Will you share that to the festival page?
Okay.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Because Elizabeth was asking that. That's great.
Okay, great. Thank you, Geraldina. Thank you, everybody who spoke today. It really has been enlightening. Certainly, we know a lot more about technology and social media than we did 15 minutes ago. And it's really, really exciting. And I know that Joyce would be incredibly impressed with this new medium. And it makes me think, of course, of Dickens and the writers in his era who were writing serial novels, right? I mean, obviously they were using more than 240 characters, but they had to keep up with their readers, and it just moved his writing along in a way that he wouldn't have written that way had he not been writing that way, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I just want to thank everybody for being here in the room, online. It's been very, very exciting. And thank you, Edmund, for keeping everything. Ron, who's in Toronto, thank you very much, Ron. And just everybody this morning, all of our people online, and we want to thank all of our sponsors, of course, here at Bloomsday Montreal. We couldn't manage without funding from Canadian Heritage, from the government of Ireland, and from MCLL, the McGill Center for Lifelong Learning, which is where we are today, from the Concordia School of Irish Studies, from the Westmount Public Library, from the Atwater Library, from the Jewish Public Library, from the Zellers Foundation, and from the St. Patrick's Society of Montreal. Have I forgotten anybody?
No.
Okay.
And
Anybody who wants to give us money, we will be very happy. And if it's over 20 bucks, you get a receipt, because we're a charitable donation. Don't forget, of course, this fantastic book of caricatures by Craig Morris. I mean, it's just amazing. You'll see, well, one of his caricatures is right on the top of our website, or the top of our events page at any rate. And I think we've got access to his site, right? I think that's the deal. On our site, you can have access to Craig's site to see a bunch of his Joyce caricatures. They're really fantastic. It's $40 Canadian. And if you're in the States, I don't know, we'll sneak them across the border and get them to you. Don't worry. That's not recorded. Yeah, okay. All right. No, Edmund's going to look after all the legal stuff here. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. And don't forget, we've got other events tomorrow. We've got a wonderful interview. You may have heard David Sherman talking today. You know how passionate a Joycean he is. We're going to be talking to him tomorrow, and to our spotlight author, Rachel McCrum, who's absolutely brilliant. She's a poet, she's a performer, she's a multimedia person. She's just extraordinary. So we're going to get a little bit of an insight into the kind of things that she's up to. Then we have another concert on Wednesday evening, fiddle music with a special guest from Ukraine, a Ukrainian opera singer who's going to join us. So we'll have a little bit of a fundraiser for Ukraine. And then on Thursday, we do the readings at the Westmount Public Library. That will all be online as well as in person. So thank you very much for being here today. And we'll see you when we see you, and keep reading Joyce. Thank you.